I'm Jason Bige Burnett. I'm here at the Archie Bray Foundation. I am doing a series of videos for you all to enjoy at home or in your studio. This video is going to talk about how we can get an image transfer onto a slab, and then we're going to form it. We're going to rehydrate the slab and form it into a press mold. We're going to get something that's going to be very similar to this, and how we can get the image, instead of it buckling around an edge, how we can press mold, we can take like a mold, press it down into it, and to form a new object or item. So it's just something fun, something easy to do. So we got my underglaze image transfer. This is done in a flame orange color. I call this Retro Vision, this pattern here. And we're gonna get this onto here, and we're gonna make a little dish out of it. Let's do this. All right, so first, if you've watched my how to transfer an image onto a leather hard object, we're gonna sort of breeze through this. I highly recommend watching that other video for more of a step-by-step. So going from the beginning here, gonna use a nice bluish purple slip, and I need three opaque coats. Three coats to make it opaque. Brushing it all over, but I gotta let it dry a little bit in between. So I'd say that's one good coat there. I don't want to overwork brushing back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth, because the water in the slip is activating the terracotta, the red clay. And if I brush too much, I'm going to start pushing around that red clay, and this will get really muddy looking. So while this sets up for a quick second, it's getting there pretty quickly. What we're looking for is it's going to be from like wet, glossy. We want to get like a fondant, sort of like a semi-matte, semi-gloss look in there, like an eggshell. If you're interested in more about transfers and stuff, while we let this dry, I do have a book out there called Graphic Clay. This breaks down a whole bunch of traditional techniques, and surface decoration is filled with interviews of different artists using traditional techniques, but how they push it a little bit different. And the second half of this talks about screen printing, so that way you can make your own underglaze transfers as well. If you're not interested in making your own, hit up ISLAtransfers.com, where you can purchase both tissue transfers and hand screen printed underglaze transfers for yourself. And we can also do custom orders. Look at that, it's ready. All right, doing a second coat. Applying it on pretty thick. I want to make sure that I cover up all that red. And you may prefer to have a thinner, more brushed surface. You may like having some of the red come through the slip. I think that's beautiful. It has almost like this skin-like blemish quality of seeing life underneath the color. All right. We're gonna let that set up for a second as well. While we let that set up, I'm gonna go ahead and start brushing in some color into these rings. Let's move this out of the way, set that aside. And the shape of the slab is to complement this MDF form that I had created. Just using a router, we drew the shape. We drew the shape around the MDF, and we took it to a router that helped create the angle that's gonna establish a little lip, a rim, and then drilled two little holes so that way you made it for easy picking up out of the form if it got stuck. All right, so the form's there. That's why it matches. The slab is a little bit larger than the form. Now using a yellowish color, I thought this would be a really fun palette. A nice flame orange, a bluish, almost maybe like a periwinkle color in the background, and then paint in some of these circles with a nice straw, calm yellow, like walking through the fields of Montana, the last best place. Coloring inside the lines here. If I go a little bit beyond, that's fine. I think this is a sign of process. Don't be too hard on yourself. You can't do no wrong. I mean, that's what my mama taught me. She said she would hang up my paintings and drawings on the fridge, and even the imperfections were perfect. So I still live by those words today. Hashtag mama's boy. All right. I want 2 thick coats, or at least to build up opacity. You can tell if the transfer might look a little brushy when you transfer an image. You can hold up so you can see it like this, but if you were to turn it around and you held it to light, you may not be able to see it so well. But if you held it up to a light source, you would be able to see how streaky the brush marks are. And so if it looks like that, add another layer of slip. Maybe go a different direction in brush strokes than you did the last time. With this pattern, I'm going to work in sets of 3. Use 3 little rings right next to each other. The application may also look thick as you're applying it to the paper, but as soon as that paper begins to absorb the moisture out, you begin to see how thin actually the slip layer might be. All right, so I have my 3 circle all filled in. I'm checking through the lights, pretty opaque, looking good. Now, I'm gonna need to do another coat of slip onto the slab here. It's perfect right now at that level of moisture if I wanted to apply the image. However, I wanted to get one more coat down just to make sure that I have that opacity built up. Okay, so we're gonna let that absorb. The clay is pretty much already at a leather hard, like this chocolate bar leather hard stage, so this will not take long to set. So while this begins to set, let's go ahead and spritz this down. We're gonna spritz the back first, making sure that the underglaze that's in touch with the paper absorbs moisture. Place it down, spray the front. Let that have a moment to absorb all of that water. There's one thing that this process and clay will teach you if you're not patient already. It will help you understand how to become a more patient person. If you rush this, as RuPaul would say, don't it up. So take time, be patient, wait, and when the right moment comes along, then it'll work out to your benefit. So we want this to be like a fondant, as I keep talking about. Non-tack to the touch. So if I was to touch it with my finger, it would not come off. If it comes off a little bit, that's okay. We can, jump the gun. And then the same thing with our image transfer is that we want this to become suede-like as well. Give this just a moment. I'm also going to talk to you about, as you know, that this is leather hard. I can't really drape this over this form. So in your studio or at home, what you could do is prep a whole bunch of slabs. If you've got all of these forms, MDF forms, ready to go, have them all ready, decorate them, and if you need to put them in a damp box, do that. Transfer them, leave the transfer paper on. I'm going to show you all how to rehydrate slabs that have decoration, so that way the next day you could just go in and just crank out a ton of different forms. So why this takes another second to soak up the rest of the moisture content. I've got a homemade MDF form here as well, but there's also companies out there that manufacture MDF forms. One is GR Graphics, and another artist that I would recommend who just seems to be really slaying it and killing it with a lot of these press molded forms is artist Katie Miller. She does a lot of image transfers as well. So if you're fond of the process that I'm using here, I highly recommend to check her out. C-A-T-I-E Miller. She's on Instagram and she shares a ton of great information. We're gonna jump the gun. The slip might still be just a little bit to the moisture level. Still a little reflective on there. I'm going to show you that if you are willing to be a little impatient, baby it a little bit longer. Don't rush right into it. Carefully handling the paper, because once it's down, it's on there. Placing it down on the slab. Because there's still plenty of moisture in the slip on the clay, and there's still a lot of moisture in the slip and on the image, I'm just gonna pat gently into place. And I'm gonna allow it to naturally draw the moisture into the slab. So just wait a second here. So while this sets up, I'd like to introduce to you all how to rehydrate a slab. And I'll put this in there in just a moment, but I'm gonna talk about the breakdown of what it is that we're going to do. So for our slab rehydration, here's the diagram. You're gonna need 2 boards. You're gonna need some plastic, brown craft paper. You can use like paper bags from a grocery store cut down. And you also wanna have like a hand towel, a terry cloth towel that you're gonna get wet into the sink and you're gonna just wring it out. You still want some moisture in it. Don't wring too much of it out, but it's the moisture in the towel that is, the gravity is gonna pull down into the slab. So we're gonna have our board on the top and the bottom, but first you're gonna begin by placing the board. You're gonna put plastic down on top of the board, and then you're gonna put the brown paper on top of the plastic. What that does is any moisture the paper is going to absorb, it's gonna get trapped, but it disperses the moisture rather than just clay, wet clay resting on plastic where it puddles and it just, yeah, you want the brown paper. Then you're gonna have your slab. I like to have my image face down overnight when it rests. So I'll place it all with the image facing up, and then at some point I'll flip all of this. I'll show you in a minute. Once you have your slab, again, you're gonna have brown paper on top. Then you're gonna have your wet towel, as well as your plastic, and then a board. So here's the diagram of what we're gonna do. Take note. And then as soon as this slab is transferred, I'm going to show you how all of that is done. Feeling good about the stage here. Gonna go ahead, I'm gonna be gentle around the brushed slip areas. I'm seeing some air bubbles and I'm chasing them around. I want to move them out of the way. If you've watched my graphic pot DVD from Ceramic Arts Daily or Ceramic Arts Network, or if you read my book Graphic Clay, one of the things that I used to do is I'd brush slip completely over the underglaze image. I don't need to do that anymore. It's really just about getting the image moist and wet and then transferring at that right moment. The issue with brushing a lot of slip on the slab and a ton of slip all over a newsprint transfer are those air bubbles. Sometimes the air bubbles, they get trapped and we don't see them. In fact, they sometimes don't even reveal themselves until after the glaze firing. So you'll get these little slip bubbles underneath the glaze, and if it's on a plate, you're not going to be able to use it. So now I really only put slip on the newspaper if it's for coloring in certain spots. I have more success of removing those air bubbles. I'm going to move on to my yellow rib. Let's get a little peek to see how it's transferring. It's releasing beautifully. In fact, because it looks so good, let's go ahead and just peel it all away. Bam. So the slab is still pretty leather hard, chocolate bar leather hard. If you see a little bit of air bubbles, tap it with your finger. If you can use like a little X-Acto knife to pierce them. Something else I love about this pattern is that after the bisque firing, I could even color some of these rings in with different glazes and really layer different material played off this image, this foundation of this image. Older work would have been leaving some rings unglazed and allowing just natural use to age it. Of course, it wouldn't be in contact with food. Sometimes it was filling them with commercial decals or luster. But how do you really, with multi-firings, build a complex image off this? So we've got to rehydrate this. So as I already talked about how to rehydrate a slab, I'm going to show you that now. So ideally, as I was mentioning, you've got your board. You have your plastic, you have your wet cloth, you've got your brown paper, and this is when I'm going to want to put my image face down. If you can, if not, you can always flip it later. And underneath my brown paper, I have plastic and I have a board. So then place the brown paper on top. Get your wet towels draped over plastic board just to keep it flat so that way nothing can fall on it or hurt it, and you let it sit overnight. I don't know the minimum amount of time. I usually do it, leave it. I'm usually gone from the studio whether it's like 8 to 12 hours. That might be the window. It also depends on how wet your cloth is, how thick your slab is, but give it a try. So I've waited overnight. And now I have a wet slab ready to go. It's soft. I'm going to need some firm sponge, about 2 to 3 inches thick. I'm going to take my soft slab gently onto the sponge. I've got my MDF form. Center it. And with force, I'm going to push it down into the clay. The foam is pushing back up, making sure that the slab wraps around. Now I'm going to clean it up. Using my yellow rib. If you've got others, that's fine too. And as I clean it up, the form really begins to show itself of where the angles are. I can also use my fingers to press down, especially where the corner is, where that clay is, pushing it inward. Because as we burnish or form with the rib, it's actually going to stretch out the clay, so we want to push it back in where that corner is. Okay. And then I'm going to continue Smoothing, burnishing, applying pressure. Then you do this with every mold that you have. And I like having a little bit of an overhang from the mold. Checking to see where it hits. And then I'm gonna let this set to dry. I try to find a prop that this can rest on. So whatever you really have, so let it sit, so that way it doesn't like pop up anything, it can just really rest and stiffen up. Once it has the opportunity to set up, you'll be able to lift it off and you get this beautiful form. One of the processes that I use in my decoration is I'll make an underglaze stain, a wash. 1 part water to 1 part Amico underglaze. However, I like to use the velvets, not the lugs. The Amico velvets are formulated different. They're not as highly pigmented as the liquid underglaze line is, the lug line. And for many of the velvets, I can brush over that wash, let it dry, and then sponge it. And so little grooves like that corner or marks that I might make into it capture, hold, pocket those bits of stain in underglaze, and it adds a lot of depth, and it really highlights the details that go into it. So even if there's a little bit of cracking where that rim is, I play with it. Work with what you got. So I know some artists, when it comes time to cleaning up the edge, they may use like a cheese cutter to hit it at an angle that makes a lot of sense. I do that when I'm using my plaster bats and I'm making plates, but there's something about, I don't know, like I'd prefer to cut it. Maybe I'm working harder, not smarter, so be it. I enjoy it. So let's do that. Using a nice sharp blade, like an X-Acto blade. Ooh, let's cover these up. The angle here can really make really affect how the piece looks. I'm gonna hit it at an angle where instead of it just being a flat rim, I'm gonna have a nice welcoming into the vessel, the way that it frames it. So holding it at an angle, and I'm gonna gently push the piece into the blade. Awesome. So now I've got that, and I can do the cleanup here. I like to use a metal rib that I have cut in half. And I'm just going in, I'm going to knock off the burrs. And I'm just using this metal rib, essentially establishing the rim, making it a little bit a rough, rounded. Especially at this time, I like having clay that has got a little bit of grog in it, so you can get a little bit of that scratchy, scrapey edge. Then I've chosen a clay body that if I was to glaze, I have options in glazing this dish. Like if I wanted to keep just the rim unglazed, and when I stain it, I can get this beautiful brick red, rough surface and have this clean, tight, colored, glazed interior. So the juxtaposition of matte versus glaze, rough versus smooth, raw versus refined. Got a little divot right there, fix that up. And with the rim, if I have a rough rim, I can try to slide it with my finger, or I can press that rim down and the underglaze stain will hit that beautifully. Pressing it down with my fingers on both sides to also soften it. So I don't want a sharp edge. Another tool you could use to help you here, if you didn't want to use a small little metal rib, is a Surform. Like one of the little mud tool shredders work great here. And what I like about these little dishes is they're great little catch-all things to have, whether in your bathroom or on your nightstand. Sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night, I'll forget to take out my earrings, and it'll be like 3 o'clock in the morning and I feel it just like poking the side of my head. And it's nice to have like a little dish on your nightstand to place them into. Also, these are really great when it's cocktail hour and it's time for margaritas. You just put all the salt in it. Yeah, have one with the water or the margarita mix. They're just, man, we use our small dishes all the time. Just cleaning it up. And from here, again, I love having a line as an edge as it begins that transition out from image to rim. It's going to also play with that hard angle of the form when it gets stained. It's going to mimic that line. Or if you want to, you could even, let's use a dot in the play. Maybe you just retrace that angle. There's just so much play when it comes time to drawing into the surface, responding to all the material that you have of imagery, and then bringing that into a three-dimensional form. I don't always feel that I'm a clay artist. I feel that I'm a print maker, a potter, a drawer, a doodler, textiles. I think some of the greatest influences that have come into my work in regards to process hasn't been taking a clay class or a clay workshop. It's been taking classes in quilt making or print making. How do you get outside of clay to find new inspiration and resources and processes? Then how do you bring that back into a material that you really enjoy? So yeah, so here's like a little trinket dish. Again, just an example of a finished one that I have with like a cat pattern on it. Oh, and these are great for cats too. Put a little tuna in there. Cats are gonna love you. Thanks for tuning in. Keep an eye out for some other Archie Bray videos starring either myself or other Archie Bray family. Thanks.